Hello, everyone, and welcome to this meeting to debrief on the session of HLPF that we just had, I think, about a couple of weeks ago. This morning is morning in New York. It's 8 a.m. And this morning, when I was doing my early morning walk, I usually walk 3 miles in the morning before the start of the day. I found myself at some point that I was walking faster than I would usually walk. And all of a sudden it hit me that I was so much looking forward to this event, this meeting at 8 a.m. And because as I was walking, I was thinking about this meeting, and I was thinking about the different panelists and presenters that we're going to have today. And I really got excited. John and I have been excited about preparing this. But as I started reflecting more on what each of them might be speaking about, I was really getting excited. Then I started working much more faster. So thank you everyone for being here. We find that this is going to be a really exciting hour and a half that we're going to have together to think and reflect and share some of our views. My name is Arelys Bellorini, and I am from World Vision. I am the Senior Event Representative for World Vision based here in New York. I'm also a member of the core group of Together2030, and together with my colleague and friend, John Romano, who's the Executive Director for TAP Network, we are going to be moderating and having really the pleasure and joy of having this interaction with our panelists. So I want to introduce each one of them, and it really gives me a lot of pleasure. I know all of them, and we have been working together, advocating together for such a long time that it's really exciting. I'm really looking forward to hearing their views, which I value highly. So first we have Margaret Olabisi Mekuye. We call her BC, our BC. She's the civil society from the Civil Society Coalition on Sustainable Development from Nigeria. BC is a development and social worker. She's also a teacher, a researcher, a volunteer, and a community development organizer. And I'm just going to say a line here on what BC does, because there is so much that she does that I would spend much more than the 1 or 2 minutes that I want to use for each of the presenters. Then we have Marianne Beisheim. She's a researcher and senior associate at the German Institute for International Security Affairs at the Global Issues Division. Marianne has a strong primary focus on the 2030 agenda and the SDGs, particularly HLPF and its ways of working. She wrote a thought piece on HLPF review that included a set of recommendations that if they had all been taken on board, Marianne, we would not be having the sense that we currently have on HLPF after this July session. Stefano Prato, he's the managing director of the Society for International Development and OP for the Financing for Development Stakeholder Group, a longtime leader in the civil society community around the right to food, financing for development, and has also led the coordination mechanism of the major groups and other stakeholders. He also played a significant role in the process leading up to the 2030 agenda and its SDGs. Jeffrey Hoffines, he's a senior advisor, Coalition for the UN We Need, and Together First campaigns. This coalition, you may all know, worked very intensively to input and contribute into the UN at 75 declaration, and has since then followed very closely the Our Common Agenda and its over 90 recommendations. Jeff is not new in the CSO community because he has played a very important role in the process of the major groups and the 2030 agenda and the SDGs, and now with the declaration, the follow-up to the declaration of the UN at 75. Julie Kofod, she's the Senior Director, Sustainable Development Initiatives at the UN Foundation. As you all know, the UN Foundation has been a major contributor to the development of the 2030 agenda and works closely with the UN, particularly member states, on the implementation of the SDGs. It's important for us to have Julie with us. And Julie, thank you so much for agreeing to be with us here, and we really look forward to your views. My friend and colleague and partner in crime in the Together 2030 initiative, Javier Suraski. He's the coordinator of governance for development research area at CEPEI. He's a senior researcher primarily oriented to development studies, particularly in the fields of South-South cooperation and the 2030 agenda implementation and the follow-up processes. So really glad that you are all here. And without much ado, let me just start calling on my colleague BC from the TAP Network and the Civil Society Coalition in Nigeria. Over to you, BC. Can you unmute?
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you.
Yes, it's good to be back home. Thank you so very much. We all know that the theme for the 2022 HLPF was building back better from the coronavirus while advancing the full implementation of the SDGs. For me, the 2022 HLPF, which was the first in-person meeting in about 3 years, assessed the impact of COVID-19 and the various conflicts and crises that is ravaging our world. It was a wonderful, about 14 days engagement and experience sharing in the US. I will categorically say that my participation in the HLPF has actually been impactful. The activities provided various recommendations on modalities for advancement so that no one is left behind. The goals reviewed, we know, were 4, 5, 14, 15, and 17 on partnership. There was a stock taking of the impact of COVID-19 and the various engagements and groundwork on 2023 SDG Summit and its midterm reviews. With support from TAP Network, I arrived in New York on Monday. The opening was on Tuesday 5th. On Thursday, 7th July, on behalf of my organization that Arelys already mentioned, Civil Society Coalition on Sustainable Development, and with support from TAP Network, I represented 2030, Together 2030 in the major groups and other stakeholders. I participated at the fire chat on the theme working towards the 2023 SDG Summit. We preferred solutions and recommendations towards the preparation for the midterm review of the SDGs and the September 2023 SDG Summit. Our organization in our presentation demanded that the 2023 summit must be a commitment summit. And we also emphasized the importance of government to come to the summit next year with concrete and ambitious commitments towards the progress of the SDG. In all, there were 44 countries thereabouts who presented their VNRs, and they provided opportunities for experience sharing in the way of successes, challenges, and lessons learned. On the last day of the summit, there was an adoption of 142-page ministerial declaration that talked about many ways to sustainable development. Some countries supported the sexual and reproductive health of women and girls. Some talked about migration and all others. In all, we are hoping that the declaration will further guide the implementation of the SDGs. While in New York, I also attended some CSO meetings. The one that was a joint meeting of CSOs to share key priorities and to discuss joint campaign work in preparation for September 2023 2022 and 2023 summits. Many of my colleagues were there at the Scandinavian House. And also I participated in the 2022 Voices of SDG 16, which was a virtual meeting that featured many civil society organizations. They showcased their work by video and voices and stories and around the world. There were also other meetings that I attended, but I want to expatiate on the sessions that I attended on working towards the 2023 SDG Summit. That session was moderated by Nikhil Sith, the Executive Director of UNITA. They moderated the sessions and we focused on processes, outcomes, and other conferences. In her submission, Makara Kano, who is the Principal Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Kenya, it suggested that the 2023 summit should be an easy to understand summit, and it also highlighted on climate change and peace and security. Our elder statesman, as we used to say in Nigeria, David Donoho, who is a distinguished fellow of ODI, he talked on 2015. He cast his mind back on 2015 and hoped that the ministerial declaration will focus on leaving no one behind. He talked on political will, and he hoped that the ministerial declaration will strengthen the role of civil society. For JUTA, the European Commissioner for International Partnerships said that the European Union will present their VNR next year, and she also called on political will. For the head of UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, advocated for connecting the summit to the midterm review of the Sender framework. We also had Paula Caballero of the Nature Conservancy. She called for a disruptive summit and advocated for one encompassing summit next year. She also suggested engaging the global stocktake process under the Paris Agreement. I want to say that ASA, who is a member of Independent Group of Scientists, 2023 Global Sustainable Development Report, called for a renewed science policy pact to accelerate the SDGs. My sister from Kenya in Africa, from the Hunger Project in East Africa, requested for a regional meeting and inclusive participation and funding for grassroots implementation. My very self from CSD, I requested for a commitment summit that with support from all sectors, both the private sector, public sector, academia, that we should engage with civil society prior to the summit in order to have a robust summit. In all, we all emphasize that the summit should take carbon inequality into cognizance. We also called for a better existence of people at the grassroots because they are the people that we do not want to leave behind. And peace and security, that is a challenge all over the world, should also be in the front burner. We touched on climate change. We said that the youth group should be involved in order to achieve SDGs. In conclusion, my takeaway from the summit as a way forward, especially as my country is presenting our VNRs next year. We did the first one in 2017, the second one in 2020 or thereabouts, and for next year, we want to see that Nigeria implements all the recommendations that we mentioned towards the 2023 summit. We want to see that Nigeria engenders a clear action plan, which is simple, which is scalable and doable. Those are the solutions that we are looking for. We also want Nigeria to shape up flexibility so that the next crisis, we don't know when it's going to come, does not destabilize the 2030 agenda that we have achieved. We want all stakeholders to be engaged. both at the grassroots, the academia, people with disability, women, and group youths. We also want government to engage all stakeholders. Thank God our organization is working with the special advisor to our president on SDGs. Thank you very much. Over to you, Arelys.
Thank you. Thank you, BC. Thank you so much. Great that you reminded us about the theme of the HLPF, and it just struck me that it's the similar theme for next year. So we have gone into an era of the recovery agenda in the HLPF, and here it begs the question of how are we tracking progress, and how is HLPF actually delivering on its mandate when the main focus continues to be a recovery agenda and there is not much disruption there. So just some food for thoughts there. And with that, I would like to call on Marianne to share your thoughts and views. Marianne, over to you.
Thank you very much, and hello to colleagues all over the world. It's great to be with you. Arelys asked me to reflect a bit on and look back on what the General Assembly of the United Nations have been discussed with respect to reviewing the high-level political forum, its format and organizational aspects. And I'm going to share a few slides with you. Let me just try to do that. Okay, can you see the slides okay? Yeah? All right. Okay, so let me remind you on what in 2013 the General Assembly decided would be the mandate of the High-Level Political Forum. Its task is to provide political leadership, guidance, and recommendations for sustainable development. But already back then, some member states said they don't want the HLPF to be too prescriptive. So in fact, there are no real decisions taken during the HLPF. It's more about peer learning on how to best implement the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. And in that respect, it has an important role of the follow-up and review of progress and implementation.
Oh, my name is Kirill.
But at the same time, it is clear that the HLPF is also not a global accountability forum, but it is, as I said, rather about peer learning. It has a few other mandates like enhancing the integration of all three dimensions of sustainable development in a cross-sectoral manner, considering also new and emerging SD challenges. And I think that is actually happening, as we see with this year's theme discussing the COVID-19 pandemic and the impacts on achieving the SDGs. It's also supposed to have an action-oriented agenda, including a platform for partnerships. And member states already back then in 2013 decided that after a first full cycle of meetings, they wanted to review the format and organizational aspects of the forum, whether it delivers on this mandate. And so in the political declaration of the forum in 2019, they pledged to carry out an ambitious and effective review of the format and organizational aspects with a view to better address gaps in implementation, link the identified challenges with appropriate responses, including on financing, to strengthen the effective and participatory character of this intergovernmental forum, and encourage the peer learning character of the voluntary national reviews. So what I want to do is I want to discuss three aspects of what has been discussed during these negotiations and actually then written down in the respective resolution of the General Assembly on the HLPF, and discuss a bit how this year's forum, the 2022 forum, try to improve on that. The background is a research project we did follow and analyze the negotiations. If you want to know more, just check out our website. So the first thing was that member states discussed that they would want to improve the preparatory processes and also the follow-up of what the HLPF discusses and what is written down in the ministerial declaration. So the ECOSOC management segment was tasked to discuss the central findings and recommendations from the current year's work at its June meeting and provide a report to the HLPF in July. And when I saw the program at first, it said that the ECOSOC president in his opening remarks would give messages from ECOSOC. I listened closely and also checked the document that you can find on the HLPF's website. I didn't find too many central messages from ECOSOC's work in there, but actually in the past years, we already had quite a good preparatory work for the HLPF. We have a synthesis report that is being prepared by the Secretariat of Submissions by functional commissions of ECOSOC. And if you look at this year's report, it's 22 pages of actually excellent analysis and also recommendations on the SDGs under review and the general theme of the HLPF. And I just would want member states to use this material in a better way in preparing for the annual HLPF. So it's, for me, not so much about having new reports and additional prep, but actually using what is already there. We have expert group meetings for all the SDGs. We have a report on the annual theme of the HLPF. So it would be already great if they would work a bit more with that. The participants of the HLPF meetings are also asked to discuss the review and follow-up of the implementation of what has been put down in previous years, political declarations and also ministerial declarations. We have yet to see whether that will happen, whether we see more follow-up in the report, for example, of the Secretary General to ECOSOC on the lessons learned from the thematic reviews and VNRs that have been discussed in this year. And also the Secretariat is requested to prepare an informal note with corresponding recommendations. So I'm looking forward to see this and then have the ECOSOC coordination segment in February next year discuss this and discuss how to use that when giving the mandate for ECOSOC's work in next year. The second thing is the thematic and SDG reviews. During the negotiations, there has been discussed that the Global Sustainable Development Report in 2019 suggested to focus more on integrated and coherent policy interventions that would actually deliver on multiple targets. So synergistic solutions, systemic approaches, integrated policy interventions, and so on. This should be there, and there's a lot of wording in the resolution that asks for this kind of approach. Yet there was debate around clustering the SDGs. So which SDGs in focus should we discuss? Should we discuss all 17 SDGs each year? And I think there will be, again, conflict when the member states will discuss this for the next cycle. This year, I think we had good panel discussions, specifically as we have just heard from our colleague on the theme, how the pandemic affected the implementation of the SDGs. There's a lot of discussion now on the multiple crises that is affecting the achievement of the SDGs. So we are going more into that direction of discussing a more complex picture. Not yet, though, discussing adequate solutions for this complex crisis. But people were saying this is the new normal. We can't use all this as an excuse to not deliver on the 2030 agenda and SDG. Last one, the VNRs, the voluntary national reviews. I think Javier will talk more about them. Some say there has been indeed, as the resolutions call for, more peer learning. Actually, now all countries are encouraged to report once in the 4-year cycle. Many countries already did report for the second time, but there seems to be not enough learning between the two kinds of reviews. For example, the resolution asks member states to assess the impact of measures taken since the last review and to really use evidence, science, evaluations, and a good databases for that. And I haven't seen too much of that in the BNR reports this year. So this forward-looking accelerated action that really delivers, not yet really there. We have seen, in fact, more side events of countries conducting VNRs that presented their VNRs more in depth, had more in-depth discussions around the VNRs, and also, which impressed me most this year, the role of voluntary local reviews is really getting more and more. They have been recognized in the resolution, and we have more and more cities and local governments that want to come to the HLPF, that understand that there is an additional value for them to present at the HLPF, to use this agenda for their local level planning. And I think that's a very good sign. UNDS support is supposed to be helpful as of in following up the VNRs. We have yet to see whether this will happen better. And same thing with the SDG moment. I'm looking forward to see an SDG moment in September that is really highlighting inspiring action on the goals as the resolution calls for. Looking ahead, last but not least, I think, yes, the HLPF is widely appreciated as a venue where member states can discuss and share their insights. But just as during the negotiations on the HLPF review, many things are blocked by numerous conflicts, and not only over sustainable development issues, but rather overarching conflict lines that concern the international order. And I think we need to understand better these kind of conflict lines. And these conflicts also always lead to rather a confirmation of the status quo, and not really the kind of leapfrogging transformative approach that we need to see if we want to get there. And that is very important for next year, when we have the so-called midterm review of the 2030 agenda and the SDG Summit that is supposed to actually deliver on the political leadership the HLPF is tasked for. We have in the report that I published analyzed these various conflict lines. Let me just name a few: reservations over sovereignty, the old debate around development versus environment, around human rights, participation of non-state actors, values, specifically gender and family issues, geopolitical conflicts, resources, any kind of budgetary implications or financing. They continue to block effective global sustainable development governance, and will also be a problem for the 2023 summit. And I look forward to discussing this with the other colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marianne. Very, very important presentation. A number of key highlights. A couple of ones I would like the group to look at. It's this issue of the ECOSOC ecosystem and how each one plays a role, the coordination segment and the different segments of ECOSOC, and what are the different aspects that we need to take into account that leads up to the HLPF, and particularly the follow-up and review of the SDGs, but also the ecosystem around other aspects beyond, as you said, sustainable development, which is the geopolitical context and the multiple crises and so on. And that is a very good segue to call on Stefano, who usually has a great inputs on this issue of the architecture and the systems and basically root causes that I always really I'm very enthused to hear about. So Stefano, over to you. And Marianne, can you please post the website link that you were referring to for your reports? Thanks, in the chat. Over to you, Stefano. Unmute.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I cannot unmute myself. You need to do it. So anyway, thank you so much, Arelys, and thanks so much for the invitation. I have very few minutes, so I will have to focus on just a few, basically 3 macro considerations. So for me, to be honest, HLPF is increasingly a frustrating experience. And while I do agree with Marianne that the HLPF is mandated to do different things, and many of them are not necessarily in a very, very strong and effective manner, let's take a bird's eye view, okay? I mean, the HLPF is the annual moment in which we are supposed to review progress and try to understand how to advance the agenda, how to give it a kick, you know, and try to really propel it forward, you know, and that's, I think, politically, that's, you know, independently from smaller mandates, but politically, that's the role of the HLPF. And I'm sorry to say that the HLPF is failing to do that. It's failing first and foremost because we have, unfortunately, we're not advancing. You know, we're advancing maybe on some areas, but broadly, we have a retrogression, certainly very significant challenges in many domains of the agenda. And despite the attempt to blame them on COVID, and COVID certainly had an important role to play, but the reality is that we were saying these things already prior to COVID. So COVID has been, unfortunately, something that has complicated an already complicated situation. And unfortunately, the HLPF has not managed to generate political leadership, guidance, and normative frameworks, if not concrete decisions, to change the course of action. You know, and I think that's unfortunately, you know, on a bird's eye view, it's a fairly strong, I understand, but negative connotation on the HLPF. Why is that? I mean, overall is because I think what we need to recognize that advancing the 2030 agenda is unfortunately linked to a number of systemic global challenges. If we think particularly about the position of the Global South, the Global South continues to be trapped in multiple dependencies within the economic framework, financial, debt, tax regimes, and many more, technology, and so forth. And unfortunately, the capacity of the implementation process to tackle these dependencies and to try to tackle these obstacles, systemic obstacles to progress, have continued to be very, very minimal. So there is a disconnect between the fact that during even this HLPF, we kept talking about the urgency of implementation, you know, but on the other hand, there's no possibility of implementation without the removal of certain systemic obstacles that do decrease, actually shrink significantly the policy and fiscal space of many developing countries. In fact, what we've seen in many ways is even the development agenda, the way we used to know it prior to the 2030 agenda, seem to have gone, you know, like, because now there is a narrative that every country is a developing country because every country is trying to pursue its own sustainable development objectives. But where has this left with respect to the Global South? I think there is certainly a reduction, a significant reduction of attention to the particular challenges of the Global South to address some of these systemic limitations. Now, that takes me in many ways to the second point. Now, the HLPF is a global gathering. Of course, within the global gathering, as also Marianne mentioned, there is peer review, there is a lot of review of what is happening in the local. But to be honest, this approach to the domestication, as it is called, of the 2030 agenda has really been overshooting the target. We spend too much time into a global gathering to compare notes and discuss the local, while we devote very, very little time to address the limitations, the systemic obstacles within the global. So in a sense, as a global gathering, we should come together as a global community and try to understand what global actions can be taken in terms of decisions, normative frameworks, programs, and other interventions. But we don't do that because we spend most of the time, particularly within the ministerial segment, in comparing notes with what is happening within the local level. I hope you won't get me wrong. and in thinking that I don't think that is important. I think it's a matter of rebalancing, the space that we provide for assessing local progress, national progress, and really understanding how global frameworks are limiting that national and local progress. So in a sense, the domestication has pretty much served the need of shifting the focus, creating a mirror screen, a smoke screen in many cases, to lift off the hook, the major powers, developed countries that continue to dominate global macro systems, when it comes to debt, to tax, to financial systems, monetary systems, and trade. So, the attempt is always to pretend that these issues are not discussed in a truly multilateral space, such as the UN and HLPF included, but rather these are addressed and continue to be addressed within developed country dominated frameworks. So the story is, when we are all together, we discuss the local. When we discuss within developed country clubs, being in the OECD, the Paris Club, or Bretton Woods institutions boards, then we discuss the global. I think this asynchrony, which really calls for a significant gap in democratization of global governance, is what is hindering the capacity of the HLPF, or more broadly, the United Nations, to really address the systemic obstacles to the advancement of the 2030 agenda. There are, in fact, discussions which are part of the means of implementation that are related to tax regimes, to trade, to debt, different debt architectures that are within the means of implementation of the 2030 agenda, but a little bit with the excuse that this is discussed in FFD, and therefore elsewhere. The HLPF continues to be completely very, very weak, if at all, addressing many of these issues. So this is for me the challenge. The challenge is of the incapacity to really tackle the obstacles that are hindering progress and keep the discussion focused on the local rather than on the global. To conclude, I think what we also need to comment is the format of the meeting. Increasingly, we see a theatrical approach to UN sessions, in which with these 1 minute interventions, 30 seconds interventions, everything is very choreographed, probably politically correct in the various balances, or maybe not even that. But is that really a format which is conducive to the kind of political conversation we should have? Does it make sense to have the agreed outcome of the HLPF prior to the actual meeting, rather than during or after? I mean, we know very well why that happens, but I'm not buying it. I mean, it doesn't make sense that it happens simply because it works for delegates. That's not the point. And it's something that it's really contrary to common logic. So the whole approach of trying to create a space which is much more than a choreographed theater, than a real place where we address issues and we take decisions, I have to say is a limiting factor. And even the fact that when we take those decisions, particularly in the negotiations prior to the actual meeting, that the ceiling of those decisions, the possibility of taking new decisions is somehow framed within what was agreed in 2015. Now, it's good that the HLPF focuses on recovery, but if the only thing that we can agree upon are the issues that we've agreed upon in 2015, when the crisis wasn't here, then we're wasting our time. If we cannot go beyond it, if we cannot realize that the circumstances have changed dramatically, considering that we are entering probably a stagflation period, a combination of reduced growth, if not actually recession, combined with high interest rates, this poses an enormous challenge to what is happening ahead of us. Now, if we can limit ourselves purely to what we've agreed 5 years ago, 7 years ago, then I'm afraid we already building in irrelevance by design. So I conclude, Arelys, because I know I'm probably speaking too much, but I hope the overall message has come across. The fact that we need very significant changes in the focus, in the format, and in the process for HLPF, and hopefully these can be useful in our own advocacy as civil society in leading to the SDG Summit next year. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Stefano. That was a great contribution to this conversation. I'm sure that in the next segment we can discuss much more of some of the points that you mentioned. But indeed, I think a major aspect to highlight is the fact that we do need a continuous transformative agenda, and particularly in today's time where we are very far from where we were when the 2030 agenda was adopted, and the mandate that was given to the HLPF, we have to question ourselves whether that is the mandate that a body that is supposed to be tracking progress is the type of mandate that it should have, among the many things that we need to be asking and begging the question. And let me go to Jeffrey Hoffines. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jeff, and really looking forward to hearing another piece of the conversation that really needs to be interlinked with the Everything 2030 agenda and the SDGs, and particularly the solutions and the implementations of it. So over to you, Jeff.
Well, thank you so much, Arelys, for this opportunity. And you've asked us to take a look at some of the next steps leading to 2023. And as you asked, I'm going to focus on the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda report, which presented world leaders with some 90 recommendations to strengthen and renew the United Nations system. And so after a consensus resolution regarding the report, member states participated in a 5-part series of multi-stakeholder consultations on its findings and recommendations convened by the PGA in February and early March with the support of the UN Secretariat. And the consultations lent support for the proposed September 2023 Summit of the Future in New York, which is expected to result in world leaders endorsing a far-reaching pact for the future and related global frameworks, including a declaration on future generations, a new agenda for peace, and a global digital compact. The summit has the potential to consider system-wide reforms in ways not seen since UN 60 in 2005, when the Human Rights Commission was upgraded, the responsibility to protect norm adopted, and the peace-building architecture introduced. The OCA report has also proposed a Transforming Education Summit taking place on the 19th of September and a World Social Summit in 2025. So with a focus on the future, the renewal of the social contract, urgent action to protect and deliver global public goods, and an upgraded UN, the SG has identified 3 key objectives for the OCA. First, it calls for a new global deal to ensure power, wealth, and opportunities are shared more broadly so countries can invest in their people. Developing countries need to invest, but are currently blocked by a global financial system designed by the rich and powerful to benefit the rich and powerful. Second, it's a booster shot for achieving the SDGs. And with a global financial system that is failing the global South, the growing divergence between developed and developing countries is becoming systemic, as Stefano has outlined. And the OCA offers a way to address this crisis head on, and as the SG puts it, turbocharge the implementation of the 2030 agenda. And third, the OCA accelerates work on gender equality and inclusion of young people. So last March, the SG announced the appointment of a high-level board on effective multilateralism led by Ellen Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia and Stefan Löfven of Sweden, which will be tasked with developing an independent report in support of the proposed Summit of the Future to be finalized by January of 2023. A public online consultation has been launched, which will run through the 12th of August, and written contributions may be submitted through a dedicated online portal, and I'll place that in the chat box after my remarks. Meanwhile, PGA Abdullah Shahid has appointed 3 sets of co-facilitators. Guyana and Egypt have been appointed to establish a UN Youth Office. The Netherlands and Fiji have been appointed to negotiate a declaration on future generations, beginning with an elements paper to be completed by September, with member states and other stakeholders invited to provide written inputs by the 10th of August. And Oman and New Zealand have been appointed to negotiate a modalities resolution for the Summit of the Future, with the first informal consultation taking place virtually tomorrow. So in terms of next steps, C4UN has developed a work plan from September 2022 to September 2023, designed to maximize civil society advocacy and programmatic contributions for a successful Summit of the Future and a strengthened multilateral system. So beginning in September of this year, along with GCAP and other CSO partners, we will be co-organizing the Global People's Assembly during UNGA High Level Week, where we as C4UN have proposed to organize a session to begin identifying and developing the synergies and interlinkages between the SDG Summit and the Summit of the Future, which we envision to be back-to-back summits in September of 2023. So building on the regional consultations undertaken in 2021 that discussed priority issues in each of the 5 regions globally, a series of follow-up meetings beginning this fall will bring together regional civil society partners to really focus on key clusters of OCA recommendations to bring critical and diverse civil society perspectives into the preparations of the 2023 summit as the modalities resolution is negotiated, as well as feed into a proposed, what we're calling a Global Futures Forum sometime in spring of 2023 that will feature civil society perspectives on the Summit of the Future. The proposed Global Futures Forum will aim to, 1, finalize a proposed People's Pact for the Future to feed diverse civil society ideas and insights into the official negotiations on the Pact for the Future, following online exchanges to commence during UNGA High Level Week this September, and building on the C4UN OCA regional and national consultations, including our OCA dialogue series with member states and other stakeholders that take place here in New York. 2, feed diverse intergenerational perspectives into the Summit of the Future, consultative processes and negotiations, including through a proposed youth engagement track parallel to the proposed Global Futures Forum. And 3, support CSO advocacy with tools for effective engagement and Summit of the Future preparations through a regular bulletin, steady stream of policy briefs, and other knowledge products and resources in support of the intergovernmental negotiations. So to conclude, at his interactive dialogue with member states in May, President-elect Shaba Karosi, who was the former co-chair of the Open Working Group on the SDGs, together with Ambassador Kamal of Kenya, he will lead the 77th session of the GA beginning in September. And in the dialogue, he testified, quote, concerning the Summit of the Future, it will be a major event in September 23 as proposed by the SG in his document OCA. In my understanding and my evaluation, it will be one of the most significant undertakings of the UN, certainly the most important since Agenda 2030, close quote. He also advised that he will devote special attention to impact-oriented and regular consultations with civil society organizations, youth representatives, science-based knowledge centers, representatives of the business community, and key institutions of finance. So we look forward to working with everyone on this endeavor. And to join C4UN and learn more about our events and publications, I will put into the chat box our website. Thank you so much, Arelys.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Very important presentation. When John and I were discussing about the program for this meeting, we thought that it's very important for us to bring all of these different tracks that are moving around the SDGs and the SDGs implementation and achievement to put it forward to our friends and colleagues in civil society, because this all is playing into that and is interlinked. our common agenda, whether we have reservations or not, is a reality and it's going through. You mentioned it, 90 recommendations. And we've also heard many comments around that, the many summits and meetings that it brings. And we also heard Paula Caballero in the session on the 2023 SDG Summit, made a call for us to reflect on the summit fever. I mean, I don't remember if she used the word fever, but it's the summit mania that the UN has gotten into. And how does all of this, first of all, how does it all link? But most importantly, how does it all contribute to actually improving the lives of people? Improving the lives of the most vulnerable, the most left behind people in the world, particularly in today's challenging context. It's a lot on the table, back-to-back summits, as you mentioned, and that's something that we want to reflect on the next segment. But before we do that, I want to call on Julie. Julie, did I see you come online? Your video. Julie Coffert, UN Foundation. She was connected and I saw the video, but I think she's not. John, did you see her? Oh, here she is.
Hi, everyone. I'm here, but I'm unable to unmute and start my camera on my own.
Okay, let me see what happened in here.
I've been able to unmute now, as you can tell, but the video still has to be allowed from the back end.
Yeah. I thought I had seen your video earlier.
Yep, it should be working now. Yeah.
Should be okay. There.
There you go.
Thanks. Over to you.
Brilliant, thank you. And hi, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you, and thank you for the excellent presentation so far. I think I'll just dovetail on some of the things that has been said immediately before my intervention, because it was really quite comprehensive on what will be happening on the Summit for the Future in particular, as an outcome of the OCA. And so I have just 4 particular things that I wanted to bring up that are sort of centered around 2 themes, which are really around narratives and really targeted and focused inputs and asks. So, sorry, I have people that are intervening in the background. Sorry about that. So, the first thing is around what will be happening at UNGA next year. So Summit for the Future is just one. We've already discussed the SDG Summit as well, but there are a few other convenings that will be happening during UNGA in 2023, including the GA high-level meeting on financing for development. The SG has proposed a 1.5-degree summit as well, and there's a high-level GA meeting on universal health coverage. So those are 5 large gatherings that are supposed to be cramped together within 1 week. Quite likely, a lot of them will be overlapping in time. So from our point of view, it's going to be really important to have a common narrative for how all of these things fit together. So when you have a preparatory process for Summit for the Future, you would have to factor in how that relates to the SDG Summit. How do you bring in the climate space? How do you use the different milestones in the calendar from now up until 2023 to make sure that it all makes sense, that we're not talking about things in silos and we're not pushing particular issues aside to make room for other things that we are more focused on. So that's one narrative. The other narrative that's really important is around civil society participation. And I think, the launch session during HLPF, the first week, the one that Margaret was on and mentioned at the outset, was interesting because all of the speakers agreed, and they were representatives from member states and from civil society and academia and so on. Everybody agreed that civil society is absolutely key. And the reason why the SDGs succeeded and were adopted in 2015 was because, quote unquote, we broke all the rules and we had inclusive participation from major groups and other stakeholders and beyond. So the rhetoric is there. Nobody's going to say civil society should not be engaging, but there's a really long way from the rhetoric to the actual action. And so we think that it's going to be very important to build the narrative about how civil society will be showing up at key milestones, not just UNGA in 2023, but at key milestones throughout the year to really create pressure and incentives for governments to act in a really decisive manner, not like Stefano said, to just come together and compare notes and brief each other on what the problems are that we already know, but really actually do something about this tagline on implementation. The other 2 points I wanted to make are around focused inputs and asks. And so I'm with the UN Foundation now, but I'm quite new to that space. I've spent the vast majority of my career as a diplomat working for the government of Denmark. I was part of negotiations of the 2030 agenda, negotiated hundreds of resolutions and sat in on probably thousands of negotiation meetings. And the main thing to focus on, I believe, is not the gatherings themselves. It would be, I guess, almost to be a bit prerogative, but foolish to think that you could show up in HLPF and something new will happen, something groundbreaking will be happening. The key is really to focus in between the gatherings to make sure that you are as effective as possible. And so Stefano again has pointed out that these negotiations are happening before HLPF starts. It happened before CSW starts. It's happening before, a lot of these different convenings are starting. Sometimes the inputs are based on reports that are deliberated upon a year in advance. So it's going to be really important to map out what those sort of levers are and then target specific asks and inputs for each of them. That's for the international arena. And then the last point, and I'll finish, is that you would have to have a similar sort of mechanism for the national and regional processes to identify which of the levers that we want to use and then have very focused specific inputs and asks of those particular processes. And one way to do this is to have a sort of burden sharing system amongst the actors. C4UN is already very engaged in the OCA. We could have a burden sharing system amongst some of the other organizations that would put on similar sort of processes for the SDG Summit or for other processes that are happening in the coming year to make sure that the momentum is really created now. To have an outcome that makes sense and is meaningful and does focus indeed on implementation and impact in 2023. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Julie. And I'm mindful of the time right now, so I'm going to go straight to Javier Suraski. And after Javier, it's going to be back to you, John. So Javier, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And it is difficult to add important information following the incredible lineup that we have today and the inputs that they provided. But let me start my today presentation by sharing with you a true short story. This is the story of a young man living in South American country, 15 years old, that had to take an important test at his school. He studied a lot, and the day before the test, he had the answer to any possible questions the teacher would ask. Public transport went on strike on the test day, and it was raining hard. So our young boy didn't go to the school, and of course, he got the grade 0. The world is unfair, he claims. I've studied a lot, and look how it ends, he told his father. And his father answered, boy, you are only 25 blocks away from your school. You could have gone to school, taken your test, and passed it. It is not unfair. It is the result of your choice of not walking in the rain. Ladies and gentlemen, this boy was me. And I learned then that inaction is not the result of doing nothing. On the contrary, inaction is always preceded by the action of refraining from doing. It is not destiny, but luck or the result of any external framework. Inaction is a decision. Halfway the time frame established to achieving the SDGs, the world is off track to making the 2030 agenda a reality. And it is justifying itself for its failures. A matter of fate labeled as economic crisis, COVID-19, Ukraine's issue, among many other options. As a result, we missed all the SDGs targets set to be accomplished by 2020. Poverty and hunger trends are moving upwards. The UN Office on Drugs and Crime reported that in 2020, a woman or girl was killed by someone in their family every 11 minutes. This won't change with more high-level meetings, with more summits reaffirming the world's leaders' commitment to sustainable development. We know the solutions to the more urgent sustainable development challenges, and we have the resources to implement them. What we really need is action. And instead of action, we have multiple inflationary problems. We're witnessing an inflation of words. We are witnessing an inflation of meetings. We are looking at an inflation of good intentions paired with speech with a great vocabulary. Each year, more than 40 BNR submitted to the HLPF provide little substantial information. In that view, the 2023 summits are a fork in the road. Will we go for more words, or will we take the actions way? The SDG Summit and the Summit for the Future are not two different processes. Instead, both are part of the same one. As the OCA report said, many of the actions proposed in the report seek to accelerate the achievement of the goals, and actions already underway to achieve the goals will in turn be key for the implementation of our common agenda. There is no reason to have two separate summits. Instead, we need a summit for action to adopt action-oriented, verifiable, and mandatory commitment to sustainable development. And don't tell me that it is not possible, another level to justify inaction. What is impossible, in my view, is to continue playing the game following outdated and, in many cases, totally reprehensible rules. As September 2023 approach, we are meeting more or less the same crossroad we faced back in 2015. Then I wrote the following. Many are asking if the 17 SDGs are achievable. Maybe, probably not. But it is not the right question to ask. Instead, we should ask, will the SDGs contribute to moving international decision makers closer to more sustainable development decision making? Now that the SDG Summit and the Summit for the Future process negotiation have begun, I wish the decision makers could hear what my father said more than 30 years ago. Boy, you could have gone to school, taken your test, and passed it. It is not unfair. It is the result of your choice of not walking in the rain. I thank you.
Thank you, Javier. Thank you so much for that. John, over to you.
Great, thanks, Arelys, and thanks to all the brilliant speakers we had. Like Arelys mentioned, I was also very excited about this because all of our colleagues here, I mean, some of the foremost experts on HLPF and the 2023 engagements, the moments ahead of us, our common agenda, everything. So thanks to everyone for joining us. We now just have a little bit of time for a bit of an interactive discussion. I mean, obviously there was a lot that was covered related to the HLPF in general, the system itself, looking ahead towards the 2023 moments, And I think I just wanted to, pose a couple of questions to kind of frame this discussion first, and then we'll throw it open to, all of you to contribute your thoughts as well. I think there was one key question here is, when we look at the HLPF, and the challenges that we have, are we a little bit stuck? Are we kind of constrained within a system that isn't as responsive as we need it to be? That's an open question about what needs to change. And Marianne outlined this really, very thoroughly. I think, taking a look at, the outcomes, the system itself, what needs to change in order to get us to where we need to be, and things that meet our expectations as civil society, what needs to happen. So that's just related to the HLPF, which is just one piece of this giant puzzle. But I think also looking at the SDGs Summit, so looking ahead to 2023 and the moments that we have in front of us, taking a look at, I think it's also good to take a look back at the last summit in 2019. And what did that actually do for us, for colleagues that work on the SDGs, colleagues that work at the national and local level? Where did it get us? I mean, what real change did it catalyze for people? And I think we have to make sure, and it's been said before, how do we make sure that the summit, kind of an open question to all of you, how do we make sure that the summit isn't just a stock-taking opportunity? How do we make sure that it focuses on action, the things that need to happen, the things that need to be delivered for people at the national and local level? How do we do that in a giant summit that might be a half day, maybe a full day if we're lucky, since there's so much happening at the 2023 General Assembly? How do we actually envisage that to happen? And I think just finally, how do we also see this? I think it's important for us to see this, the 2023 summit and the moments, as not the end point of our engagement, not just mobilizing for 2023 and the summit itself, but I think we need to see it as the starting point of the next phase of our work around the SDGs. An open question: do we need to change our approach and tone as civil society? We're halfway. 2023 represents the halfway moment to 2030. Is this a moment for us to take stock and say, maybe the system isn't working for us as civil society? What do we need to do outside of the system, or push the system forward, or reform the system, whatever it may be, to actually make a difference in the second half? So just a few things to kind of frame the discussion, but I'll just open the floor just to see if anyone has any reflections on the HLPF or any thoughts on opportunities for 2023. If you can, just raise your hand using the raise hand function in Zoom at the bottom, and we can call on you.
John, I have my hand raised.
Sure, yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, I wanted to offer a reflection on the SDG Summit and the other summits in the context of a comment made by Paulo Caballero, in the session on the SDG Summit. And of course, she said, we want to be disruptive. She said, forget all the multiple summits. Let's have a singular summit. I guess not unlike what Javier is suggesting. And, that's all well and good, but I think the underlying dynamic that she was also explaining is that the reason why the 2030 agenda was so impactful and the SDGs was such a significant contribution is because it crossed the red line and joined two separate tracks of intergovernmental negotiations that were up to that point not to be crossed, which was the post-2015 development agenda as a follow-up to the MDGs, and the Rio +20 agenda, which was kind of the environmental track. And I think the point she was making is that when these two intergovernmental tracks were merged into one, it created a transformational opportunity whereby the three dimensions of sustainable development were for the first time really joined together. And those of us who are active in the preparatory processes of Rio+20 will recall that it was indeed a bumpy ride. And there was a sense that the SDGs was kicked down the can was kicked down the road when member states couldn't agree on the SDGs in that preparatory process. But as we know, what happened is that Rio+20 proposed a very innovative intergovernmental process through the open working group, which itself took time. So, another dynamic that is often a cause of tension in these intergovernmental processes is that on one level, the post-2015 development agenda was an SG-driven process, not unlike the OCA agenda, kind of SG-driven, yes, being taken up now by the General Assembly through different intergovernmental tracks. But that being said, the SDG Summit is truly an intergovernmental track. The 2030 Agenda was one of the first major intergovernmental conferences that was initiated by the Global South under the leadership of Brazil. So in my view, what could be potentially transformational in 2023 is if the OCA agenda and the 2030 agenda truly reinforced and complemented each other. Now, one of the things we're seeking to interrogate is how does the OCA agenda accelerate the achievement of the 2030 agenda of the SDGs? I mean, is that just rhetoric or is it for real? And that's something that we really want to take a look at in the year ahead. But just to say that I'm hoping, despite the challenges of the geopolitical moment, which is not favorable to great power cooperation on a transformational scale. But that being said, I'm hoping that these twin summits of the SDG Summit and the Summit of the Future will be reinforcing. Although, final point, it remains to be seen if the Summit of the Future will take place in 2023, as Cuba and other delegates from the Global South in negotiations have reminded us. The modalities resolution has yet to be adopted and the date has yet to be agreed. So stay tuned.
Great, thanks a lot, Jeff. I see, Marianne, you have your hand up, but I just wanted to see if anyone from the participants list wanted to provide their own reflections before I call on Marianne. Again, please just raise your hand using the Zoom function, go to reactions and then raise hand. Or of course, feel free to use the chat box as well. So maybe I'll hand over to Marianne as we allow people to raise their hand if they want to come in. But Marianne, over to you.
Thank you, John. I agree with a lot that Stefano and others, Jeff and Julie, have said. And I just wanted to point out once more that in my view, this is just the state of multilateralism that we are in. The literature on international relations distinguishes, when talking about the UN, about 3 UNs. Number 1 is the member states, because it's an intergovernmental organizations, and they are the ones that take the decisions and that decide, on any kind of action that is taken forward. Number 2 is then the secretariat, the bureaucracy, the international organization as such. And number 3 is all the non-state actors that hover around, including us, civil society and others, working, trying to support the UN. And the problem is indeed that, as Stefano pointed out, and I would even say, it's not only that member states agree only on what has been decided in 2015. I would think they agree on less than what has been decided in 2015. And I think the negotiations now this year on the ministerial declaration show just that. Just take what Julie has pointed out, we need a new burden sharing system, absolutely true. But we still have the same discussions around common but differentiated responsibilities, going around, and nobody wants to spend more on anything. So the symmetry the UN's reliance on summits and voluntary action in a bottom-up fashion, now focusing also on the local level, is just that, a weak effort in that context to mobilize action and to facilitate those that are willing to deliver, build coalitions of the willing to go forward, because this is actually what the second UN, the Secretariat and others can do. They work as facilitators, and that is definitely second best, but I don't see, that we will get more next year also in the SDG Summit. What I would think is it would be huge progress if the PGA, the President of the General Assembly, this year and next year, would only allow countries or coalitions of countries to come and speak at this summit if they present new and convincing policy packages that are potentially transformational or disruptive, as you have said, and deliver on multiple goals and targets. So really carefully select and resist the pressure to again present the VNR that that has happened a lot at the last summit, that countries again presented their VNR results, and that is not helpful. We really need to do more in terms of a midterm review and really looking ahead and focusing on this action. And as Jeff pointed out, the OCA Summit of the Future needs to be complementary and do the same for those coalitions of countries and others who are willing to reform the UN to get in better shape.
Great, thanks, Marianne. And I think that's an important point too for the HLPF and the summit. I mean, focusing on, the HLPF not just being an opportunity for member states to, showcase the good things that are happening in their country around the SDGs like they do now with the BNRs, but taking stock of where we are. I mean, we're at this stage now halfway there to 2030 where it can't just be taking stock. We need to figure out, okay, if there are challenges and gaps, what do we need to do concretely to address those? And that hits on the point that we made earlier and made a lot from civil society around the need for commitments. So not just doing the stock taking, but making concrete commitments on what governments are going to do to actually turn things around in the second half of implementation. So very relevant for HLPF, but also for the summit. How do we make sure that that summit almost marks a turning point for us or a catalyst for ensuring that that governments are coming to the table with really concrete and specific commitments. I see a number of hands now with only 8 minutes left, but I see Brian O'Toole had his hand first. Brian, if you can unmute yourself and just introduce yourself, please.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Brian O'Toole. I'm part of the civil society group in Ireland, and I've been listening with great interest to everything that's been said, and the presentations are absolutely marvelous from everybody. In particular, I was taken with Stefano and with Marianne, and what I noticed in particular was the whole notion of political will and how there seems to be a weakening HLPF, and it seems to be kind of in ever decreasing circles. It seems to be getting weaker and weaker. However, there is a political will, and we just have this idea in Ireland at the minute where we're trying to promote or trying to get involved. I heard David Donoghue's name was mentioned a little bit earlier as one of the people who helped bring the Sustainable Development Goals across the line, along with the Kenyan ambassador as the final negotiating partnership. In Ireland next year, we're hoping to create an SDG moment that we can bring to the UN. Ireland are presenting their VNO for the second time next year and are preparing well with civil society involvement at this stage. Also, Ireland are being charged with the development and the presentation of the EUVR, which is the SDG implementation for the European Union, and we have a role in that. We're also hoping to get Mary Robinson involved, David Donoghue involved, and Geraldine Nason-Byrne involved. And the whole idea of trying to mobilize a team who are well recognized across the world is to create a new political will or political momentum, or to perhaps even looking at renegotiating some aspects of the HLPF, which seem to have become weaker. And this is what David Donoghue has been pushing for, but it's coming at a particular time, which is the SDG Summit in 2023 and at the halfway point and after COVID. So there's a there is a whole new momentum, and we just feel that Ireland is a small nation that has had the ability sometimes to punch a little bit above its weight, and if we can push it a little bit further, we can actually make this happen. But it's about using those who have a respected voice beforehand. So I just said I'll bring that to the table now, and hopefully we can bring it to fruition in the HLPF 2023 and the SDG Summit 2023. And we notice too that a lot of the negotiation takes part in the spaces that happen between and before the major meetings. So thank you very much indeed for that moment, and thanks for fantastic contributions. Thanks.
Great, thanks a lot, Brian. And actually, this is a really great point too, thinking a little bit about, VNRs and showcasing the really great examples of, good VNRs, positive, commitment making. How do we make sure that the VNRs become more of a race to the top almost? If we have governments that are being ambitious with their VNRs, really coming with commitments, how do we showcase that as an example for other member states to aspire to, instead of what we currently have? So thanks for that example, Brian. I see Javier, do you want to come in really briefly, because we're running a little bit short on time? So over to you.
Yes, but maybe it would be interesting to hear first Rochelle, that was not part of the panel, so I will take the floor if we have time.
Okay, great. Yeah, Rochelle, can you unmute yourself and please?
Sure. Good morning, John. Good morning, colleagues. I just kind of wanted to be just a little rainbow in the discussions, but just wanted to mention that the Bahamas, we just signed our UN multi-stakeholder agreement. So I think that's really positive in terms of seeing the implementation of the SDGs. And so that's kind of my focus, just trying to determine how civil society can not only encourage, well, we've done our part in terms of the Bahamas, but not only encourage governments, but also determine how we can, from an individualistic standpoint, really influence seeing these goals implemented. And I think that's important to remember, outside of just looking at the systemic changes, as well as reforming the HLPF. But I think it's important to stay focused on the idea that we want to see those goals actually implemented and see, and be able to actually have some data for future opportunities. And so that's pretty much what I wanted to say. I think we're very excited in my side of the world, in the Caribbean. We have a few countries that have signed our agreements for cooperation. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what we do in terms of those frameworks.
Great, thanks a lot, Rochelle. And actually, you make a really great point too about the civil society commitment side of things. I mean, when it comes to advocacy, I think one thing that we've been pushing for in our approach, at least, especially in the lead up to the summit, is really sending the message to governments that civil society is committed. We are doing our part and showcasing the really, the great stories of colleagues that are doing great things to advance the SDGs in their own context, and send the message to member states at the summit to say, civil society is doing our part. It's time for you to step up and do your part, basically, to really encourage them to do better. So it's a really great thing. I think we also need to do a little bit more of in the lead up to the summit, is doing a little bit more storytelling of voices from local and national CSOs, and bring those voices to the summit and really showcase the role that civil society is playing. Okay, over to you, Javier, and then we'll end with some insights from Julie.
Okay, I will be very, very brief because we are running out of time. Just two suggestions. The first one is related with PNRs. I have been working with PNRs since the very beginning of the process. And my suggestion is to those who are working or approaching to the PNRs, please be aware, PNR process is poisoned, and it's poisoned in two different ways. Why? The first, because of the constraints imposed by the HLPF itself, its methods of work. And the second, because of the high influence that fairy tales seems to be produced on VNR pen holders. So be aware of that. And the second, it's related to what we have been discussing on systemic issues, non-systemic issues, with what is our place as citizens and as institutions to change, think, and if it is possible. And I deeply recommend you to take an approach to the feminist theory, particularly on the issue of power and the different kinds of power, because I think that we have a very interesting opportunity to innovate and to find new pathways if we really can understand how the power is not only distributed, but also executed, and what is our part in the power struggle. So I deeply recommend you to read about power in the feminist theories.
Great, thanks, Javier. And Julie, over to you.
Thanks. So I have also just two really quick points. I wanted to remind everyone about the Unmute Civil Society initiative backed by Denmark and Costa Rica. 52 member states signed on to that last year. That was sort of the CSO Action Day. It was one of the recommendations that we did during HLPF. So there is many, many member states that you can get formal backing from in these proceedings. And sort of piggybacking off of that point is that I tend to be largely optimistic, and there is a lot of willingness, like Brian said as well. There's a lot of willingness right now. There's the political will, not just amongst the member states, but also in the UN system. You know, as UNF, we do work quite closely with many, many UN partners, and there's willingness and openness for us to shape how this is going to look like. And we should, you know, take that upon ourselves and not say, well, perhaps we can get such and such. No, we actually should and could right now influence what this whole week is going to look like and how this these twin summits will develop. And the last point is just another mechanisms that we should be thinking about is the regional forums that will be happening in the spring. If, you know, you come back to the commitment from the civil society that we are going to really show up, then those regional forums should be one of the first places that we're all showing up. You know, that could be a first step on sort of a festival, SDG festival that leads up to a really, really intense pressure on HLPF for line ministries to show up. Almost use HLPF as a pre-summit for the SDG Summit to make sure that everyone involved at a national level, at a ministerial level, are going to be there and make the proper commitments and showcase the solutions. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Julie. And thanks for the contributions in this interactive session. Unfortunately, yeah, we've run out of time. And I think there's a bunch of open questions that we have from this discussion. I mean, things that I think we need to address a little bit deeper. I think some challenges, obviously, as it relates to the HLPF, and you know, as Julie just mentioned, there are some really concrete opportunities for us in the months ahead. I think we need to avoid looking at the 2023 summit as kind of the end point of our discussion, but instead work now to ensure that those moments in 2023 help catalyze the things that we need to set us up better in the second half of implementation, not just from civil society, but again, all of the systemic issues that the UN and the multilateral system currently face. I think there's a lot ahead of us, and surely more of these conversations to come. So with that, I just want to end just by quickly mentioning just a very brief conversation that it was had around HLPF this year, namely around civil society mobilizing for those 2023 moments. A bunch of civil society network colleagues came together at HLPF this past few weeks ago to really start the game plan on what our approach is, not just engaging in the UN, the negotiation, things like that, you know, the really nerdy stuff that we all love and engage with, but how do we engage colleagues at the national and local level? How do we ensure that the summit
maintains relevance for those colleagues at the local level, ensure that it's responsive, to ensure that it catalyzes the action that we really need. So there's a lot more to come from the civil society networks side of things as well, and surely more conversations like this that need to be had. I think we kind of opened up a bunch of different challenges and issues that I think warrant a deeper dive on this front as well. So with that, I just want to thank all of you for joining us. I know that a lot is happening now, and we're all still kind of unwinding from HLPF still, I think. So thanks again for joining us. We will be in touch with notes and recording and things like that, but also look forward to more conversations like this in the future. Hopefully a little bit more opportunity for us to have some discussions around some of these really key issues that we have here. So thanks again, everyone. Thanks to the panelists. Thanks to our co-hosts and Together2030, and very much looking forward to continuing this conversation in the months ahead. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.